between the two. We'll get it. This is the Final Word Cricket Podcast, a podcast about cricket with Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins. Right off the top, I'd like to welcome to the world Evelyn Annie Richardson, who was born to one of our dear listeners and online friends earlier in the week. Welcome to the world. Hope it goes well for you. And I just saw the look on Adam's face when I mentioned somebody having a baby girl. He looked very happy about that.
I do. Evelyn, what a lovely name. Is it one of our friends on the Patreon page or something like that?
Indeed.
I've missed this.
Yep, Rob Richardson, who we've had on the show.
Brilliant.
In terms of numbers and numerology
yes.
Before. Has had that joyous arrival during the week. So salute there. You're also about to give birth, Adam, to the vaccine game that's happening on Friday.
I was going to say, has Rach been briefing you? And that's not to say she's pregnant, but if I was to find out via you, that would be a turn up for the books.
That would be quite funny, actually. Yeah.
Mate, yeah, she could punk me and she could tell you, hey, you can reveal to Adam on the podcast that I'm pregnant again. She's not, by the way. I'd love to have another kid though at some point. So you mentioning Rob's arrival and Evelyn, I'm kind of getting clucky again. Yes, we have a vaccine game coming up. It's no longer really the vaccine game, of course. It's the Final Word 11 taking on the Oval Dream Boys at Dulwich Cricket Club, 4 o'clock Friday for those who want to come along. I suppose those who are playing will have to get there before that. Mm-hmm. These are all things that I'm working on. I'm working on many things at the same time. One of them is making sure we finalise the numbers for the vaccine game. But I believe we have 11 players ready to roll. And that is important in a game of cricket. If you've got 11 players,
the great game of cricket.
It is just the right amount, not just right. And we've got others who are coming along to watch, and there's still. I kind of guess we're still talking about live streaming it, or that feels a bit fanciful. But Jeff, we have done a live stream where we were at the pub and we had a couple of iPhones, or no, that was more sophisticated. But when we did those IPL streams, that was kind of like computers into Zoom, into YouTube.
Totally.
Like that wasn't rocket science. We can do this if we have some technically minded people there.
Here's what you need to do. You just need to take a laptop and tether it to a phone and have the umpire hold it with the webcam facing down the pitch. That's how you do it. That would be good. That'd be better vision than you get during an ordinary game. You don't get that up close and personal.
Actually, now we're going through it. I was originally saying we need cameras at both ends, but why do we need to have cameras at both ends? Until 1989, cricket in this country on the BBC was only broadcast from one end. The argument being that, as we learnt in calling the shots last year, that the viewer was entitled to feel like they were sitting in one seat all day, so they watched both innings or both ends from their one seat. Indeed, Christopher Martin Jenkins, who's sort of as quite of a forward-thinking broadcaster, that was his view. That when I read this in a book of his last year when preparing that documentary, that he thought that the change to both ends was going to hold the game back. Sort of what Packer had done 10 years earlier. He thought staying at one end was better for the sport. So of course we watch those scenes from Leeds in 1981. You only see behind most of the Australian players because Bob Willis was running towards the camera. But yes, that really means all we need is one phone into one Zoom, and then we can kind of patch it into the Final Word YouTube, and then we will have. And we've had a couple of people say they can commentate, so this actually should work.
Yeah, you could literally just have the umpire holding a phone as long as it's got enough battery charge, one at square leg.
I think the problem there was if you have the umpire doing it, they're not going to offer a running commentary. It wouldn't be very interesting to listen to. What I'm thinking is that I think Mel Shawley's coming down, for example. Maybe she can be, talking into the computer while the computer is taking the pictures from the cricket in front of them.
They're in the computer. They're in computer.
I've just worked this out while we're talking. Maybe we should have worked it out before we hit record, but here we are. Vaccine game. It's Friday at Dulwich.
It's Friday. Go along. Now, this wouldn't be the final word if we did not start the show with the most important thing to us. Yes, we're going to talk about Afghanistan and cricket. Yes, we're going to talk about England and India and the stoush that's ongoing there with Nagraj Gollapudi of Cricinfo, who's joining the show later on. As far as things that are very close to our hearts, a week in which, and you will have seen this if you're on the internet, you will know about this, but maybe some of you haven't. Maybe some of you have been offline. Maybe you've been hiking in Scotland and you're just tuning back in. We've been, as Bonnie Tyler sang, we've been holding out for a hero. We've been waiting for someone in international cricket to start running out the non-striker, because when they do, they cop grief for it, and they decide that they don't want to do it again. Ravichandran Ashwin decided he supports it ethically, but he doesn't really want to have to do it again. Chemo Paul decided he didn't want to have to do it again. And yet, during the week, Maeva Douma, playing against Uganda for Cameroon, ran out the non-striker not once, not twice, but 4 times. 4 times in one innings in a T20 match across 2 glorious overs, 4 times. You would have thought after the first one, the players on the team who had suffered the run out might do something about it, but they did not. They kept wandering out of their crease every time the bowler came in. They kept looking to get a head start on the runs that they wanted to get, which they're allowed to do as per the laws. And you're also allowed, as per the laws, to take their wickets if you're smart enough and sharp enough to do it. And Maeve did, with a brilliant combination of skill and audacity that belongs to the young. 4 times. The revolution has begun. Others will follow. This will be the starting point. This is our Independence Day.
The first thing I thought, well summed up, the first thing I thought when I saw this was, 4 mancads in one day, hiding in the depths of your imagination. 4, not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times. I think we have a team, don't we? We are now Cameroon Ultras. Mm-hmm. That might have had a different meaning at different points through their troubled history, but we are going to be Cameroon cricket fans. Why wouldn't we be? So they were playing in the 2023 Women's T20 World Cup African Regional Qualifier. Andrew Nixon supplied me with all the information. Andrew does a wonderful job cataloguing and chronicling associate cricket, and especially what's been going on at T20 level since we had that open up and liberalised a couple of years ago, with all of these games have international status. So, yeah, the Mancas didn't help that much because Uganda still won by 155 runs. Mm-hmm. The thing that frustrated me most with Maeve...
And Cameroon have barely played.
No, that's right. And Cameroon's a relatively new story. I think this is like the first game that Cameroon played, they conceded 300 runs, something like that. So they're just finding their way at the moment. But Uganda were already 153 for 1 halfway through the 16th over when Maeva Douma, what a legend, decided to take the bails for the first time. She should have done it earlier on. She got the first wicket, by the way. So she got 1 for and 4 mancads to her name.
That's a 5 for. That's a 5 wicket bag for my reckoning.
Maybe that's the next thing. Now that the MCC laws are now in line with the ICC playing conditions, you want to learn more about that. You can watch our Mancad special from, when was it, Jeff? April 2019, when the patron saint of the final word, Ravichandran Ashwin, elected to Mancad Jos Buttler. We really went deep on it and explained the history and the law and why it's a perfectly acceptable dismissal mode. And also, and people miss this out, when they hear Jeff and I talking about this dismissal, they think we want to see more of them. We do in the short term. In the long term, we would love to see none of them, because it would mean the batters are keeping behind the line before the ball is bowled. And that's fine too. If, like the back pass in football, once they eliminated that, then you saw a time of chaos and then things settled down. I wouldn't mind the same thing happening, because Maeva Douma has been a pioneer in this space. So well played her for having the guts to face the backlash. Maybe what I also thought, Jeff, was maybe she didn't realise what was about to happen. Like maybe we've often speculated that it could be through newcomers to the game, relative newcomers to the game, that they won't carry the emotional baggage of the Mancad. They won't be in the weeds about this. They wouldn't have had debates at the pub about it. They'll just see it as a mode of dismissal in keeping with the laws of the game, and they'll do it. And they'll do it repeatedly, and that'll be part of their cricketing experience. That might be the case for Maeva Douma, where she just saw it in the laws and thought, why not? And didn't realise that there's a bit of a taboo around it. This kind of tallies with what we've speculated might happen in the past.
It's about the freshness, the fresh look at the laws. It's about the boldness of youth. Douma is 16 years old, just new in the world. freshly arrived, like Evelyn, just got here really, and he's saying, well, why not express myself? And that's what I really enjoyed about watching back over the footage of that match, was the expression. There was nothing reticent or shy about these run-outs. Bang, bails off, and she was celebrating. She was dancing. She was jumping up and down with her teammates. They were jumping in the air and doing hip bumps and chest bumps. They were having a great time because they were taking wickets. And, there are people who will make the argument that cricket is about the contest between bat and ball, and that's how it should be. And that is largely true. But you can still be run out. And that is not a contest between bat and ball. That is a contest between keeping your concentration to stay in your ground. And it doesn't matter how you get out of your ground. You can trip over and fall out of your crease and be stumped. You can be backing up and the ball ricochets off the bowler's ankle and back into the stumps. And nobody says that the fielding side should retract that dismissal because it wasn't a fair contest between bat and ball or whatever it is. And that's an accident, as opposed to when somebody actually has the skill and the awareness to watch the non-striker, to see what they're doing, to time it properly, and to bang the bails. And what I really liked about all of those run-outs was there was no third umpire there. That umpire didn't need to think about it. That umpire got to look across and see players who were a foot out of their crease and go, well, yep, they're definitely out. And the finger went up all 4 times.
Well, it's an ICC event, so it's being overseen by proper ICC umpires. By the way, I've interpreted Andrew's message incorrectly before. This was Cameroon women's first game, which makes it even better, I reckon. It's their first game in the tournament, first game as a fully sanctioned international playing nation, whereas Uganda, by contrast, they're the team that scored 300 in a T20 back in 2019, and they're very strong. According to Andrew, they're the best chance of getting past Zimbabwe in this tournament. So that gives you some context around the mismatch between Uganda and Cameroon. But I mean, sure, we can get tattoos to reflect the achievement of Maeva Douma, but I think simply getting a Cameroon women's cricket top with their name on the back will suffice.
I think so. And I think it's also very important to me that on the scorecard, her initials are MF Douma, almost MF Doom, the great rapper who passed away recently. And also in internet speak, you're like, Maeve will send you to your motherfucking doom by running you out when you take liberties at the non-striker's end. It is truly astonishing to me, though, truly astonishing, that say, not even the 4th player, the 3rd player to be run out in that fashion didn't think, I might want to watch my bat. I might want to leave a bit of bat in the crease as she's coming into bowl. Like, were they just having a nap during the rest of the innings? Did no one tell them? Well,
yeah, it looks like watching the footage back, they just continued on backing up way too far. Yep. I mean, you think the message might get back to the dressing room that we've got a man catter. We've got one. We've got a live one here. And by the way, we copped a bit of grief yesterday celebrating this on Twitter, as we tend to do, about calling it a man-cad. As we've always maintained on the final word, the reason we use the man-cad is we've taken ownership. We think that Vinu Man-cad deserves to have this dismissal named after him, because we don't think of it as a point of shame. We think of it as a point of pride. So we use that with pride. We don't want to use it. We don't want to say browned out after Bill Brown, the man he ran out twice in 1947. We think it's far more important to celebrate the ingenuity of the great man Vinu Man-cad
and the courage,
great all-rounder,
the courage to stand up against orthodoxy. To be shamed, to be traduced, to be undermined, and after all of that, to be able to stand up proudly and say, no, that was me. That was me. That was my decision, as it should be. We should celebrate Vinu for all of the things he did, the many wickets, the many runs, the double hundreds, the 5-wicket hauls, and the fact that he was willing to take a stand on people who were not taking a stand because they were going for a fucking walk out of their crease. Stay in your ground and you've got nothing to complain about. It's as simple as that.
So we celebrate you, Vinu. We celebrate you, Maeva Douma. What a legend. On international debut for Man-cads. More of it, I say. Hopefully at some stage we hear more about her story. There's very little out there about her story, for she is only 16 years old. Most of it is still to be written, hopefully, in the great game of cricket. Jeff.
In the great game of cricket. Michael Caine voice. She was only 16 years old and she ran out 4 players at the non-strikers end. Right. Okay. The Ashes. Are they happening? You've been following this pretty closely in your home base in the United Kingdom, Adam, in terms of I guess what's going on with England players, particularly a bunch of England players who pulled out of the IPL, which would indicate that they are going to the Ashes, but there are other players who are not so keen on going. On it goes, the back and forth, the rapidly changing situation in Australia, blah, blah, blah. Lay it out for me in 30 seconds or less.
Yes. I think the rapidly changing situation made this more of a problem until maybe a week ago. But now that there are far more jabs going in arms than we might have thought, the rapidly changing situation might be trending in favour of the Ashes going out, being played uninterrupted. Mm-hmm. So, as you say, Johnny Bairstow, Chris Wokes, David Milan joined Joss Butler and Ben Stokes in not playing in the IPL. And, yeah, some people saw that as, that means they'll be right for the Ashes. They'll get their extra time at home. I saw it the other way, which is that these guys are knackered, and are they really going to subject themselves to a trip to Australia with hard quarantine? And not only that, and this is the really important bit of this, it's not just about the 14 days quarantine. I think everybody accepts that's the price for doing business, and I think there's a broad acknowledgement that in all probability the England players will get the deluxe treatment. They will do it in a resort, possibly in the Gold Coast like the AFL players did last year. And, it won't be that taxing for them compared to sitting in a small hotel room, where
they're not going to be at the Ibis in an executive single room with a view of a brick wall.
Exactly. And I've done it once before, and I'm looking to do it a second time to get out for the Ashes myself. Like, you kind of accept that that's just the way it's going to have to be for the time being. Although, I mentioned before the rapidly changing situation, maybe it won't be by December. We'll come back to that in a moment. But after that George Dobell piece about the IPL absentees, Dan Breddy wrote a secondary piece for the SMH and the Age, which kind of laid it all out about how, as he put it, how thinly spread this whole thing is, and how difficult it is even for the big nations to keep the show on the road. We saw it at Old Trafford last week. We're seeing it with the IPL. A lot of people are looking into Australia from afar, saying, "Geez, what the fuck's going on there?" It's 19 months after the pandemic started and they've still got half the country in lockdown. Oh, gee, don't fancy that. Don't fancy getting stuck having to do 2 quarantines in Oz. I understand the anxiety around that. And then an extra layer of the school term dates. So usually the players would have their families out for, sort of 3 weeks over Christmas on an Ashes trip. That's quite standard practice. But because they would quarantine, the players, this is in one block, their families and their kids who go to school would come out when the school term ends. They would do their 14 days separately, and then they would have 5 days or something like that in Australia before having to turn around and go back for the new school term. I think James Anderson explained this in his column the other day. So the idea of families coming out, yeah, fine, in theory. In reality, they won't see much of them, having just gone through a World T20 in the case of the 3 format players as well. So it's not just, I said this on Twitter on the weekend, it's not a case of back in the good old days, they jumped on a boat and they were on there for 7 months and they played deck cricket and then they went to war afterwards and they came back. Yeah, okay. But, community expectations and parenting expectations have changed in the last 60 years, 70 years. It's not about, and obviously what's happened in the last 18, 19 months, we have a debt of gratitude to these professional cricketers who have been willing to go into a number of COVID-safe bubble environments and really affected their private lives. Remembering, of course, that their job is a professional cricketer. It doesn't mean it has to be their life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't sign up to that when you have any other job. So they have made extra sacrifices to keep things going through the last 19 months. But all of this, you put it into a pot and you stir it around and you say, fuck, it looks a bit problematic, doesn't it? Because, why wouldn't senior England players be like, I don't fancy that? However, here's the caveat. I don't know if you saw today, Jeff, but the projections for 70% and 80% are really quite good in Australia. By that, I mean the rates of vaccination. And it may very well be the case that before we get to the Ashes, we've had quite a number of weeks where it's been up to 70 or 80 in some states, which does give CA flexibility. And this is the main point I want to make today about this topic. CA suddenly, I think, might have quite a bit of flexibility here, whereas they didn't before. It comes down to scheduling. If they are willing to, let's say they're trying to race the clock, right? Mm-hmm. They can affect the clock. They can control time a little bit. No one's forcing them to play the first Test match. Well, they can control. They can. They're like Dr. Samuel Beckett stepped into the quantum leap accelerator and vanished. They do have the ability to stop the clock a little bit, and by that I mean they can just push the Test back a little bit. If they want to, get ahead of this, one model I've had put to me is, okay, what if the Ashes start on December 26th at Melbourne? What if we buy the better part of 3 more weeks and we go to Melbourne, which by that stage will well and truly be above 80%, probably closer to 90% double jabbed. Then we have Sydney, and then we sort of consider it from there. We reroute the schedule. You might say, well, what about the England team and what they have after coming up in the Caribbean? I had a look at this. They start with 5 T20s at the end of January. The test matches don't start till the second week of March in the Caribbean. The England team could finish the Ashes at, let's say the first week of February, then go home and see their family for a couple of weeks, assuming that they've not been with them the whole time, and then still make it to the Caribbean for a tour game before playing the first test match over there. It's actually not that sticky at that point. Right. There is a little bit of fat at the end. So
given that Australia, if that were the case, Australia would have played 4 test matches at the back end of the Ashes in 2022. That will be their annual allocation of test matches exhausted, and Australia won't need to play for the rest of the year. So they'll be fine.
Well, I mean, they're all going to go to the IPL in April anyway, right?
Yeah.
That's cool. I'm not anti-IPL, and players should go to the IPL. Fill your boots, whatever, no dramas. But and they'll have played a home World Cup before it. They're going to be an away World Cup. They'll have a home World Cup coming up in October. They'll want to go to the IPL in April. That's fine. This, in theory, in the, let's call it the Collins Lemon model, they will be done and dusted with the Ashes by, I guess maybe February the 7th or something like that. Ample time to have a bit of R&R, maybe play some domestic cricket, and then get off to the IPL thereafter. The reason I'm putting this is not because it's an optimistic. The reason I'm saying this is that this is an optimistic way of interpreting the world. It gives England's players a chance to go home after the T20 World Cup, and then this is the bit I missed before in explaining it. They can bring their families with them to quarantine. If they came out for a test match that was starting on December 26, they could, school-age kids, term would be finishing as they're coming out. Now, I know it's not perfect to go rolling straight from that into a test match, or it may not quite line up as elegantly as I'm putting it there.
It'd be a resort sort of situation. There'll be big jugs of freshly squeezed juice by a pool, and there'll be golf buggies to drive into the sea, and
Well, they might be able to. Maybe they take their kids out of school 1 week early. Yeah, I'm kind of at the margins here, but what I'm steering towards is there is a way of doing this where they can buy themselves some time, and based on current projections, optimistic projections perhaps, I'm not sure, but these are from reputable sources saying that in New South Wales they reckon we'll be above 80% I think it's like the 18th of October or something. So that's one state. Brisbane, on the other hand, where the first test is currently scheduled, 5th December. And we don't know what the states will do with each other after that. So it just gives you that latitude to go, right.
This is where our situation is that in Australia, depending how you want to define it, the states that have been good at or lucky with managing COVID, where they don't have any cases, the restrictions are likely to be stricter there for longer, whereas the states that have been bad at or unlucky with managing it, who've got cases everywhere, are more likely to throw their hands up and say, oh, well, bugger it. I wouldn't be at all surprised if by early December, New South Wales was saying, you don't need to quarantine if you come in from overseas. Potentially, you could just fly them into New South Wales and have the whole Ashes. We were going to have the whole Ashes in Queensland. We could have the whole Ashes in Sydney. Yeah, one at Hurstville Oval, one at Blacktown, one at North Sydney.
We're talking. One at Coffs Harbour, the big banana.
Yeah.
Got to have the big banana involved, Jeff.
Because they could probably just walk out off the plane and start licking people immediately, given the way that trajectory is.
But even the states that have a stricter interpretation, like you're right, the states that are more locked down, still trying to get to zero, or have gotten to zero in WA's case, you could play the 4th test at the Gabba in the final week of January. In other words, buying Queensland another month and a half, and you could play the final test in Perth, where, based on what we read today, Perth are looking like maybe February might be the point they open their borders to other states. It could be quite elegant where you go, Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, who might have a tripartite thing going by then anyway, and then from Adelaide onwards to Brisbane for the penultimate test and Perth to finish. Again, I think, and look, I'm sure people are talking about this at Jolimont at some level. Why wouldn't they be? But I don't think we should be so rigidly holding on to December 8. Doubly so given Afghanistan's hit the skids.
Yep.
Now that's not happening. The test players don't need to be playing a test one week and a test the next week. They'll be preparing via Shield cricket anyway. So, yeah, that's where I would leave this chat for mine. And we know, per Breddig's piece, the domestic season's got hairs all over it right now too. Yep. And this is what Dan had in his piece about New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. They might have some arrangements between each other. They might be just playing cricket against each other for the first half of the season. Bit of a throwback.
If the lead up to World War I and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand has taught us anything, it's that nothing goes wrong when you have a tripartite pact. The best possible thing to do is have a tripartite pact. You're all in it together. No worries at all.
One go, we all go. Well, anyway, that's how I'm seeing it. I'm not saying we have any influence here on the podcast, but gee, it would help. Imagine where the vaccine rate could be by the middle of December around the country, even in states that have got a very hard border. It might just free things up just enough. And this is, by the way, let's not give a leave pass to the federal government here. The very fact that we're in this situation is the botching, the garden variety botching that has been the vaccine rollout, from the tepid messaging early doors, the sort of suggestion you can go vaccine shopping and wait for the one you want, all the Fortress Australia dog whistling, the inability to buy the right amount of Pfizer, the fetishization of Pfizer as though it's some magic drug, while AstraZeneca's for the poor countries
plebs.
and for the plebs. All that bullshit has all happened and put us in this situation, but it can still be fixed with time. And a bit of space.
Right.
So watch this space.
We are up against the forces of Nicki Minaj, though. I don't know if you caught up with Nicki Minaj hopping on Twitter and saying
you get huge bollocks, right? You get,
my cousin's friend in Trinidad got the vaccination, and then his testicles swelled up so badly that he had to cancel his wedding. As people have pointed out, the only thing that has side effects of testicle swelling is chlamydia, which means that he got chlamydia and then his bride-to-be called off the wedding and he blamed it on the vaccine.
Imagine trying to blame getting done cheating right before you're getting married, right before the big day. You've got the clap, you've played some shots, you haven't tapped up, you've done the wrong thing. You've really done the wrong thing. Well, it's the vaccine that did it. It's a vaccine that did it.
It's a vaccine. I got that shot, and the next thing you knew, I had pendulous warts growing off my extremities, just leaking like a tap. Yeah.
Speaking of
there are lies that work bulging, and there are lies that don't work. All right.
Speaking of bulging nether regions, I'm not sure if you caught today Tony Armstrong, who's the wonderful reporter at ABC News Breakfast now. He described Tim Paine. This is what he did as well. Tim Paine as having a bulging dick, which is why he had to have surgery on his neck rather than a bulging disc.
Australian skipper Tim Paine is set to undergo neck surgery, but medical staff remain confident that the veteran will be fit for the Ashes. Paine has a bulging disc that has been that's a funny one, has been causing him pain. I'm going to throw to you very quickly, Michael.
Bulging what?
Disc.
Disc.
I said disc.
That's what I thought you said.
Thank you, Tony.
I'm just going to drink water.
Mate, over to you.
Why, mate? Why?
And Tim put it up on his Instagram story and said, yeah, this is right as well. So Tim's got a bone spur in his spinal column. He hasn't responded to treatment, which isn't ideal, because I would have thought that...
Just pick up the phone, Tim. Why isn't he responding?
Having surgery on September the 14th, when the season's come, this is not the right time to have surgery, right? They've said that he'll be all set by the end of October, able to play domestic cricket in November, but that has to be. I mean, that's a positive case scenario. There is always some risk when it comes to surgery, certainly when it comes to that part of the body. So, a story that came out yesterday was well managed. They were quite clear about what they were doing, CA, with Tim. But yes, under the knife today.
I suppose the two areas can overlap, because you can have a hernia downstairs and you can have a herniated disc upstairs. But yeah, I was thinking about it. There was a long period of time where one of the great jobs to have was Australian Test captain. It's respected. There's gravitas. You've got to work hard for it, but it's a great job to have. Then there are the last couple of years when the best job to have is Australian Test captain. You don't have to do anything. You got your feet up from January to December. You pop out and play a couple of games for Tasmania, play a bit of club cricket and bowl a few overs in the 50-over stuff, and club cricket in Hobart for fun. And the rest of the time, I might have to do a Zoom interview with Peter Lawler once a month or something to fulfil the contract. And
well, remember he went to Darwin as part of the support staff for the for like it wasn't an Australia A team. It was like it was a bunch of next tier guys coming through. He went with his old former Tassie teammate Shannon Tubb. They were the two. So I'd imagine they had a massive circuit for 2 weeks, he and Tubby out on the lash whilst coaching the kids. I mean, how good's this? I mean, the fact that he's got time to go to the Northern Territory, I suppose you'll never know if you never go. But, I mean, going up there for 2 weeks of fun and frivolity, I'm going well, whilst notionally being an assistant coach.
Bin, Bim Tain, Timabin. Australian Capitan Timabin has a dick problem. Yes.
Yeah, tying the whole thread together with Shannon Tubb. Right, so that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. So that's where we've gotten to with Tim Paine.
Okay.
And where we've gotten to with the Ashes.
Yep. But
there are some more serious issues at play this week as well, though, Jeff.
Yeah, we have to take a road that involves Hobart. That goes to Hobart, or would have gone to Hobart, and does not go to Hobart anymore. Afghanistan. The men's team was supposed to be coming to Hobart to play a test match, something we talked about a lot, something we were looking forward to a lot, seeing that first step of having the first test match they would have played in Australia, the first sort of bilateral match they would have played in Australia, having been there for the 2015 World Cup, but that was the only visit from an Afghanistan team so far. Obviously, the country's been overrun by the Taliban in the last couple of months. It's happened extremely quickly, extremely abruptly, and it's prompted a rethink from the Australian end about how things should proceed. This is something that brings in government, it brings in administration with Cricket Australia. There's the Tasmanian government's involvement, the federal government's involvement. The Tassie government sort of kicked it off by saying that they wanted to consult the local Hazara community in Hobart about whether it would be appropriate to go ahead with the test match. The federal government was a little more quiet on it, although eventually, once the story became a story, Richard Colbeck was drawn out on SEN to say that we've made a clear statement that we don't support excluding women from sport at any level. And it was kind of left up to Cricket Australia largely to make a call on it. Now, they've done this in a vague sort of sense. They haven't expressly cancelled the game yet. They've phrased things in the subjunctive to say that if recent media reports that women's cricket will not be supported in Afghanistan are substantiated, Cricket Australia would have no alternative but to not host Afghanistan for the proposed test. It's blameless sort of language, but we know where they're going with it. Basically, the situation is not going to change in Afghanistan. The Taliban are not going to suddenly say, oh yeah, we love supporting women in all their endeavours, and think that they should be allowed to do what they want. And so effectively, the match is off.
Yeah, look, when we left this a couple of weeks ago with Shadi Khan Saif, when we had him on the show to talk about cricket in Afghanistan following the Taliban reclaiming the country, the sense we got through that chat was that cricket would be on surer footing this time than in the Taliban's previous reign, on the basis that there'd been such a groundswell of support among local Afghan people for it. Many consider it the national sport. The amazing story of the men's team especially, and indeed even the fact that there had been steps made to have a system in place where women could be playing there sooner rather than later. There'd been these contracts handed out last year and so on. However, I mean, almost at the first time of asking, really, the Taliban have told on themselves when this question was put by SBS, and the spokesperson went on to articulate a position which is thoroughly abhorrent. And maybe one we should have always anticipated. Maybe we should have always saw this coming to a head the moment that the Taliban were back in Kabul a couple of weeks ago, that it was unsustainable to imagine a world where the ICC could have Afghanistan as a member nation when they had such strident views about not only women playing, but I mean ridiculous stuff about, they might be subjected to cameras taking photos of them, and sort of language that doesn't fit anywhere in the modern world, full stop. It doesn't. Remember, the Taliban doesn't reflect the the people of Afghanistan. It reflects a segment, a militaristic segment, who sort of are set in the dark ages, really, in terms of the way they see the world. So this isn't about religion; it's about a group of people who have a thirst for power, megalomania, and here we are, where the ICC have a constitution that expressly forbids excluding women. The men, again, great story, one of the greatest stories in world cricket over the last 20 years, yet they are in the firing line. This series, if it doesn't go ahead, and it won't, there's no way they're playing this test match now. Richard Colbeck, a friend of mine, a man of principle. You may not expect me to say that about a member of this current government, but he genuinely is a man of principle and a cricket lover, a sport lover, a proud Tasmanian. That would have been a tough thing for him to have gone out and said, and supporting the test not going ahead there at Bellerive Oval. Same applies for Cricket Australia, who, as we know, Jeff, stand to lose quite a lot of money due to their settlement with Channel 7. And I'm sure they'll find a way through that, by the way. I don't expect that 7 would be unreasonable about these circumstances. But they're going to have to find an accommodation there, which they otherwise wouldn't have had to if this test went ahead. So all told, I found this quite a difficult issue to grapple with in the last week, because part of me instinctively feels as though, and Izzy Westbury articulated this position well, that the only way you can approach this is with a hardline position and to hit them where it hurts most, in power, and in this case the men's team. But I also have felt challenged by the alternative view that why would you punish the part of the cricket landscape over there, which has been such a source for good, and there's this ongoing push and
which
pull,
is one of the few good news stories to come out of a country that's done it
precisely
so horrendously tough, not just for the last 20 years since the Americans went in, but for the 20 years before that, when the Russians went in, when the Mujahideen warlords were tearing the place apart between themselves, a place where violence and strife has been literally part of daily life for the best part of half a century. Well,
and longer. You can go back to the middle of the 19th century when this all started, right? I mean, the push-pull with Afghanistan, I feel desperately for the people there who've had the chance to, have a different kind of existence for 20 years, and here we are. And, I'm probably going to say what you're about to say, but the cricket team, the men's cricket team, and, the positive energy around getting women playing the game, I mean, the rug's been pulled from underneath both opportunities there. It's just a desperate situation.
Yeah. So what I thought we'd do here is, because I don't think either of us come into this like we come into some topics thinking, I've got a great solution, here's what my opinion is. Yeah. Like you, I don't really know what my opinion is, and my opinion doesn't really matter. But I don't think there is an obvious better answer in this case. So I thought what we might try to do is assess the arguments and at least try to help people work through, think through it as we've been trying to think through it while preparing for this show. So the argument against hosting Afghanistan is pretty simple, that you've got a dictatorial religious regime who've taken over the country violently and who've always been violent and have used violence through their entire existence to try to push a hardline religious view. If they claim to be running the country and you host a team representing that country, then you're in effect endorsing that regime. You're supporting that regime, and you're supporting what they purport to be their aims, or not what they purport, what actually are their aims, which is that women shouldn't be involved in anything. The previous iterations of the Taliban were getting to the point where they were making people paint over the windows of their houses so that people couldn't look in and possibly see a woman inside wearing a burqa. This is the kind of level of insanity that they've got about this idea that women will be perceived outside the family. It goes to that level of extremity. And so in a sport that has been very transparently and obviously and enthusiastically trying to promote the women's side of the game, at least for the last few years, even though it took a long time to get there, it's completely anathema to support as a full member a country that won't let them participate, right? And so when you look at it like that, it seems pretty black and white.
It does look black and white when it couldn't be anything close to black and white, right? I mean, if we took a moral stance on who we, and I say we in a very generalist sense here, but let's say we as Australians, based on the politics of the countries sitting on the other side of the net, there'd be a lot of countries that Australia wouldn't engage with. And
There'd
Afghanistan...
be countries who wouldn't want to engage with Australia, and fairly so.
Well, perhaps so. I mean, I haven't really thought of the other side of it. But certainly you could mount an argument for a number of countries that would fall into that boat. Yet we've got strong trade relationships with them, and therefore that would never happen. Strong diplomatic ties as well. It's very different in Afghanistan. They don't have a lot to offer Australia. So, and also they're not considered a strong cricketing nation. If they had the strength of a team that was in the top 4 or 5 teams in the world or something like that, which isn't to say they won't be there, by the way, in a generation or two. Certainly in the shortest form of the game, that's the way their trend line's going. Considering they were only admitted to the ICC in whatever it was, 2002 or something like that, to where they are now. As I say, it's a staggering story to think they're in the World Cup ahead of Bangladesh this year, next month. They're in that World Cup. Bangladesh are not in that World Cup. They're in the qualifier tournament trying to get into the World Cup beforehand. So that's where it's not black and white, because if it were... This isn't, in other words, South Africa apartheid, right? So that South Africa apartheid was a situation where... a number of countries, the Commonwealth, said, no, we're not playing ball. And for 21 years, there was an exclusionary policy around South Africa and sport through that apartheid regime. That was a decision that was able to be taken because the South African government were part of the club before. Afghanistan aren't part of any club. I mean, they're part of the ICC, but this is such a modern thing that they've been involved in with cricket. It's not like they go back a century or more, like a lot of the cricketing nations that Australia are usually playing against. So it's easy to write it off as well. They're just some small nation. It doesn't mean anything anyway, and we'll get on with life.
Well, yeah, I suppose there is that. There's the comparative lack of clout, but it also, I mean, the South Africa comparison is an interesting one. I think I'll come back to that in a little bit. But in terms of weighing up that argument against continuing to engage with them, just cutting them off completely because of their reprehensible government that's taken over, and I mean, it feels ridiculous to even call it a government. It's a hostile military takeover of the entire country under extreme duress and under the intense threat of violence that was cultivated through the previous regime and through their time out of power, where they continued blowing people up right, left and centre. The argument that you can make to say that this match should go ahead and that Afghanistan shouldn't be questioned as being part of future tournaments and so on. Hamid Shinwari, who's the CEO of the Afghanistan Cricket Board, put this together and posted up this statement, and he basically says he concedes that that yes, this is completely anathema to the way that international cricket is going with wanting to have more women's participation, right? But he also says try to understand the cultural context of the country that we live in, and that we've been trying to make this, have these meetings of modern and conventional ways of thinking in Afghanistan, that they have been working on developing women's players. They have been developing a women's team. They've been having to do it sort of softly because of the cultural environment that they're working in. So he explains the dramatic changes in governmentally in terms of regimes over the last 40 years. And the quote from him, that there's a couple of quotes I'd like to include from him. He says, this has included numerous changes in the governance of our country and approaches to both our traditional cultures and our Islamic faith. The whole country is in flux and transition with the new government as it sets its priorities and policies. The development of women's cricket has been slow in Afghanistan, just as it was for other more traditional cultures. And he references, quite rightly, I think, Pakistan, Bangladesh, places where even a generation or two ago, women's cricket was treated very hostilely, and in a lot of quarters still is. He says, nonetheless, there has been a quiet but significant development of women's cricket over the past 10 years. If CA decides to isolate the Afghan men's national team, it will have no impact upon those cultural and religious values as they stand, but the development of cricket in our country will be stalled. And this seems basically like the position that Gideon Haigh was putting on Offsiders on the ABC the other day. They're pretty much parallel.
Yeah, well, Gideon put a well-meaning but premature response, largely echoing what Hamid Shinwari said late last week. And I sort of appreciate that perspective. Certainly the bit about traditional cultures, using his words there, and citing Pakistan. I mean, we told that story before on The Final Word about Pakistan's first trip to overseas
in the 1990s.
In the late 1997. The story of the Khan sisters effectively being smuggled out of the country just to play amid death threats in newspaper editorials. So it's not without precedent that a country that has a very strong view about women's cricket can soften and evolve and now provide enormous support to women's cricket like Pakistan does now. They've got 3 tiers of professional contracts, and sure, it's not perfect, but it's emblematic. You know, women's domestic cricket's on telly in Pakistan. I mean, there have been huge strides forward, even in the career of Sana Mir, and we've celebrated Sana Mir on this podcast before, but even in her 15 years as an international, so much has changed and so much will change again. So whether, you know, again, as Hamid Shinwari says, that all we are doing is stalling that progress, and for the men's team as well in the same decision, because presumably this will be a domino effect, right? Australia have made this call, again, using Gideon's words here, well-meaning call, which first blush looks like it might be against their financial interests. It certainly provides a problem for members of the board, incumbent members of the board like Earl Eddings, for example, who is looking for support from Cricket Tasmania, according to well-sourced reports in the 9 papers earlier this year. So it hasn't been without some personal cost, them saying, no, we're going to pull the pin on this trip. But they've made the call on the basis that they can't look past this. Again, it's fraught, isn't it? Because I absolutely see that perspective, but I do think that there is going to be... The people who will lose out of this won't be the Taliban. It'll be the cricketers, and as a rule, I don't like outcomes that affect the people rather than those in power.
Yeah, I think one important distinction to make is what Hamid Shinwari is talking about the broader cultural situation. The idea that women shouldn't be playing sport, that's not just a Taliban thing. That's not purely a sort of extremist, reactionary kind of idea. Like, obviously there's a diversity and plurality of opinions and, you know, cultural positions in Afghanistan, so I'm having to generalise, but there would more broadly than in a Taliban supporting sense be people who have those same kind of cultural views, that women have these very defined restricted roles. I was reading Brett Sutton, the Chief Health Officer, had written a report when he was being a medic in Afghanistan in 2003, I think it was. So, you know, when the Taliban were as much on the outer as they've ever been, and talking about this experience of being a medic in remote clinics and treating women who needed better treatment than he could provide, who needed to go to a hospital in a town that was a day or two's travel away, and how they wouldn't be able to get there because they would have to be accompanied by their husbands, and they couldn't have both parents leave the children behind or leave a farm behind or whatever it was. And so there were women not getting essential medical care because they were not allowed to travel to the hospital by themselves. That was just unacceptable. That was not even taken into consideration that it could happen that way. So you are dealing with a broader cultural understanding that women are not supposed to do these things. Now, that's something that obviously to you and me seems absurd and seems outdated, but it is the reality of the way of life for a lot of people in that country. So for that to change over a period of time was going to need to be gradual. And I've seen a lot of people talking about the cricket, saying that the ICC had already given the Afghanistan board a pass because they didn't have a women's team for the last 10 years and they were supposed to. But they were working on that. They were gradually trying to make that change. And I think that is one massive difference, that up until a few months ago, there was the potential, there was the possibility for an Afghanistan women's team. Right now, with the Taliban in control, there is no possibility of that. It is not going to happen. It will not happen. And so I think that's a really important distinction to make when you're looking at the ICC backing the Afghanistan Cricket Board before versus whether it can continue to back that board now.
Yeah, that was a strong line last week, wasn't it? That CA are happy to effectively shun Afghanistan now, but they were happy to acquiesce and allow them membership as an associate member. And again, as a full member, remember that they went from associate in, I think it's 2002, to full member in 2017 when they became a test-playing nation. And that this could have been considered then in a more fulsome way. But yeah, as you say, Jeff, it didn't, even though there wasn't an Afghanistan women's team, it certainly felt like there was a roadmap towards one. Whether that was being prettied up in such a way that, to satisfy people like you and me.
Window dressing or...
Hard for us
not.
to know.
Yeah.
Really, really hard for us to know. But again, sort of based on the conversation we had a couple of weeks ago with Shadi, he's been covering this story for not just 2 months, but for sort of a number of years. And his attitude towards it, his positive attitude towards there being real meaningful change towards the women in Afghanistan having a chance to play, being inspired by watching the men on their journey. I mean, it's exactly the same as what we hear with Ireland, for example, who they became full members with back in 17. You hear about the Irish women's journey being kind of the men's journey, but sort of 15 years ago. And that's nice. I like the idea that one follows the next, that one piece of successes has enabled another. But yeah, the fact that won't happen now is galling. I'm not sure there is a right answer here, by the way. The ICC, I mentioned like maybe the domino effect of Australia saying no. That might be the catalyst for the ICC saying no. I'm a little bit surprised the ICC haven't been more on the front foot about this and haven't been a bit more forthright in their view. One way or the other, mindful that there's a World Cup coming up in, I think Afghanistan as being part of the main group won't play for another 6 weeks. But still, that requires travelling to UAE, going through their own quarantine process. If they have to replace them in the tournament, that's a massive deal. Huge deal.
It almost feels
huge global
like,
story.
It almost feels like hands over the ears. Like, let's just hope we can get through this World Cup and then we'll worry about it afterwards. Like, it's too soon to do anything about it now.
Yeah, look, and that may well be what happens. That they, fingers in the ears for the next couple of months, get through the World Cup and deal with it then. But yeah, this will all come to a head when Australia formally cancel this Test match, which seems like a formality now, on the basis that we've had this comment from the Taliban spokesman last week, and surely that isn't sort of a rogue comment. That's thoroughly in keeping with what we.
I can't imagine he's getting a call from the other blokes, running the joint, saying,
actually,
tone it down, buddy.
Actually, take down a few notches. Put out a retraction, please, champion. No, that's not what's going on here. So.
So I guess
I'm not sure I'm not sure if there is like with a lot of things in public life, there isn't a right and wrong answer. There's simply a number of shit answers, a number of bad outcomes, and you just have to pick the least worst. I think that this is where we're steering towards here. No matter which way administrators go, it is going to be a bad result. It's just which bad result they go for.
And here's what I've been trying to work out is fundamentally you're looking at what option is going to help or hurt the Taliban and what option is going to help or hurt other people in Afghanistan. So talking about that South Africa comparison, because a lot of people have said, look, it's a very morally clear question. We did it with South Africa. You can't support a discriminatory government with violent tendencies, which would probably rule out about, 95% of the world's governments if you held that line. But the South Africa comparison doesn't work because, as you said, South Africa wanted to be part of a bigger club of nations. They wanted to be on the inside, and they were.
Well, they were on the inside. The crucial point is they were part of the big kids club, right?
Right, and the Talib, like their whole thing has been isolationist historically. They've been about building an Islamic caliphate on their own interpretation of things, which is, doesn't follow the doctrine where it's more convenient for them. And that kind of suits them all right to be left alone. There is some room for leverage with aid money and things like that. But look, they'll probably get financial and military assistance from China, and they'll probably get it from Russia, because the governments in those two places do not give a shit about the morals or ethics of the governments that they're supporting. So in a lot of ways, they think, well, who cares if people in Western countries are getting annoyed about this? It doesn't matter. They'll be able to get that other backing pretty easily. So it doesn't. You can cancel matches against Afghanistan. It's not going to hurt the Taliban particularly. But then I suppose the other side of that question is, if you let that Afghanistan team play, does it help the Taliban? Because it will give them legitimacy. It will let spokesmen from their government be able to show up to events and come in and shake hands and be treated as legitimate national leaders, just like anybody else who shows up. It shows Afghanistan to the world in a normalised sort of way to say, oh, look, everything's fine. You know, their team's at the World Cup, all is good, right? So is that enough? Is helping a reprehensible government in that way enough of a reason to say don't do it? Or is the other side of that, again, more important, to say that Afghanistan as a country, rather than the Taliban as a ruling sect, if Afghanistan as a country has an increased presence in the world, that offers the possibility of increasing pressure on the Taliban, because that Afghanistan is more visible. There's more engagement with Afghanistan. If there are male Afghan athletes competing in Olympic Games, for instance, and there are no women there, it's going to be extremely obvious that that's the case. Does having more of a presence in the world allow for more possibility to set examples for people in Afghanistan to say, here are things that you could be aspiring to, here are ways to try to increase pressure on the government from within, and ways to increase pressure on that Taliban government from without? You know, there are so many different ways to look at it, and I don't have any sort of answer for it.
Yeah, I suppose what you end up doing is reaching around for historical precedent. So you've already detailed why South Africa is a tough one, but I suppose you look at other countries where there have been considerable sanctions, economic sanctions, and beyond. I mean, Iran, Iraq at different times. Has it worked? I mean, I'm probably not fit to judge that question, but other countries that have been isolated by the world at large, has it been more effective shutting out countries, or has it been more effective letting them have a seat at the table and trying to steer their behaviour? Is it possible to steer the behaviour of the Taliban? Probably not, because sort of Wahhabist extremists who see the world in such a way, can that change in the space of Rashid Khan's leg spinning career? Probably not. To be really blunt about it in terms of what this actually means for these young cricketers who've done such a proud job for their country in the last 10 years. So again, it comes back to this idea of, is there a roadmap forward? Is there a way forward where Afghanistan can play without it lending legitimacy to the people that run the show from the Taliban? Probably not. Is that a price that we are willing to pay as a cricketing community in order to not damage both men and women who play the game in that country? I mean, it's an impossible choice. Yeah. But it's one that has to be arrived at, and hopefully in this dispassionate way. And I hope this conversation is viewed in those terms. This isn't about hot takes. It isn't about sort of being overly strident, I don't think. It's about trying to acknowledge that there is loads of grey area here, and well-meaning people trying to arrive at an outcome that's suitable. And I think CA have endeavoured to be part of that. But yeah, it's yet to be seen whether it'll be effective or not.
We will have to race through the rest of our far less important points from here. I know that you were watching the England-New Zealand series, the women's series, which concluded with the third T20, went right down to the end.
Yeah, it feels weird changing gears from talking about a death cult to talking about a sort of a brilliant game of cricket at Taunton last week. But we'll give it my best shot. Jeff, did you know that Amy Satterthwaite has the best bowling figures for any cricketer in T20 international cricket at Taunton? 6 for 17 she took down there as a 20-year-old bowling seam up in 2007. So that might have partly been why Sophie Devine backed her to bowl at the very death, and it didn't quite play out. Satterthwaite bowls off spin these days, and a big juicy full toss which Sophia Dunkley whacked away to get the win by, I think it was 4 wickets, but with like 2 balls to spare. One of those games of cricket, Jeff, where you didn't really know who was in the lead, so to speak. The win viz would have been all over the place. And reflected the fact that it was a really balanced series with England winning comprehensively at Chelmsford, New Zealand bouncing back superbly in Sophie Devine's 100th game at Hove, and then this final game, it did show some green shoots for New Zealand. Brooke Halliday, towards the end of New Zealand's innings, bashing about 5 boundaries in 2 overs. I think they hit 50 in the final 4, which got them up to where they needed to be competitive. I think about 150 or thereabouts. Bates back in the runs after missing out twice. Devine back in form with the ball. Kasparek taking 3 wickets, including getting on a hat-trick inside the power play. So whilst I share your view, Jeff, that New Zealand have some pretty considerable structural issues in terms of setting up for a home World Cup in March and being competitive in the next T20 tournament, I think they are going better right now than they have been for a little while, with the next generation slowly sort of having its say. Mentioned Brooke Halliday. It was Maddie Green
like
in the previous game.
She had a couple of good moments in the T20s against Australia as well, not so long ago.
Her record, it's little bits, right? It's tiny. Her record's dismal. It really is dreadful. But it's just little things you see and you think maybe they can sort of find something there. There's something to work with there. Lee Kasparek getting back in the wickets, having copped a pounding in the first game of the series. So now we move to the one-dayers. Danny White back in the runs for England as well. That was enough to get her into the one-day squad. I think she made 35 of the 40 runs that England made in the power play, something like that. So White's back into the one-day squad. Likewise, Kate Cross. Likewise, Lauren Winfield-Hill. And Charlie Dean, who didn't play in the T20s, the 20-year-old all-rounder. Let's call her a sort of a batting all-rounder. Bowls quite useful off-spin, plays for the Vipers and played for the Spirit in the 100. Been on that pathway for a couple of years too through the Kia Super League. She'll presumably get her debut at some stage in the 3 games that start on Thursday at Bristol. Then we go Worcestershire, Derbyshire, Leicestershire and Canterbury in the space of about 8 days. So it's going to be a very, very busy week for me. But can't wait. It's been a good series so far.
Matthew Hayden is the new coach of Pakistan for the T20 World Cup. Who saw this coming when Miss Farrell Huck waved his way out the door, a week ago, when Waqar Younis went with him, potentially because they weren't too keen on the squad they'd been given. Bit of trend in that. Rashid Khan as well quit as Afghanistan captain because they picked all the blokes from the 2015 World Cup to be his T20 World Cup squad for 2021. But Matthew Hayden and Vernon Philander. That's the coaching duo for Pakistan for the T20 World Cup. What's going on there? I can't understand a word Matthew Hayden says. How's he going to put across his coaching philosophies about the history of Tasmania or whatever it is?
Well, this was my main concern. There is a cultural language barrier a lot of the time with Pakistan for players that don't speak English as a first language. And Matthew Hayden, his communication style is unique. And they said in their statement that he is Australian, has the experience of winning World Cups, and is a great player himself. All of those things are true. He's most certainly Australian. He certainly won World Cups, and he's certainly a phenomenal cricketer. Whether that translates to getting the best out of the Pakistan side, well, I'm not going to judge that for the time being. No comment. But he and Vernon Philander might have some good nights out when running that team. It kind of took me from left field. I didn't realise that Matthew Hayden was in the market for a coaching gig. I thought he was quite settled.
I don't think he knew either.
Yeah, well, he gets a lot of gigs, right? He works for the BCCI, doing internationals for India. I think he does the IPL. Does some stuff for Channel 7. So, he's got makes a good living out of the game. So I didn't necessarily think that he'd be doing an international job, but it's only for the World Cup. Maybe it's just a nice short-term gig. Might do it for 2 months and then situation normal. But it'll be fun.
Nothing to lose. If they win, take the credit. If they don't,
that's possibly the case. But remember, since the last T20 World Cup, back in March 2016, it'll be 5.5 years between T20 World Cups. Pakistan have been the number 1 ranked team in the world for the vast majority of that 5.5 year window. They're not going there
Not
they're
in,
not
not,
going.
not in the last couple of years, though.
No, mate, not in the last 18 months. In the last 18 months, they're giving that crown over to Australia, India, and England at different points. But more often than not, Pakistan have been a real force in the shortest form. So I think they're going to that tournament with high expectations. They should make the semi-finals. They should be threatening to win the thing. So, yeah. I mean, it might be the case that Matthew Hayden's a World Cup winning coach. Yeah. It could happen.
I mean, this is a guy whose contribution to T20 cricket, as best I can remember, is using the mongoose bat in the IPL, pulling out the old mongoose. The dodgiest bat company that's ever lived. Sorry, the most incompetent, certainly. The ones who were the key backers of the career of chronic cricket fraud Adrian Shankar, who just believed every word that he said and kept trying to flog him to franchises around the world, despite the fact that he'd never hit a cricket ball in his life. I mean, this, that was what Haydos brought to the table. Oh, bring out the old mongoose and whack 40 off 20 balls with it and take your sponsorship money. So, all right, good luck, Pakistan. I hope it works out for you. This is The Final Word with Jeff Lemon and Adam Collins. We are very happy to be joined by Nagraj Gollapudi, who is the ESPN Cricinfo news editor, ear to the ground. There aren't too many quiet and relaxed weeks in terms of the politics of Indian cricket, Nagraj, but the last week has probably been less quiet and less relaxed than most others.
Yeah, very quiet. Nothing happened, right? Nothing at all happened. Then it started happening last Wednesday. I'm not sure how to describe it. I mean, I was telling you guys earlier, it's just the chaos and confusion which is always prevailing. But for some reason, it has shifted to cricket for once during the Patodi Trophy. It was so engrossing, so enthralling. And we were talking about spells of bowling. I wouldn't use the word T20 word matchup, but there was a matchup happening between Bumrah and the certain batters and Joe Root, the way he kind of just was in command. And I was just looking forward to how is he going to seal this series, in the sense, how is he going to finish this series? He had such a big record on the cusp of such a big record of becoming the first batsman doing whatever number of runs, gazillion amount of runs. Yeah. And then what actually I felt I blame the ECB is that why were there no guidelines dropped? Why were there certain defined boundaries? There were no defined boundaries, and that kind of led to such a chaos. And it started with the Indian head coach testing positive first, and then moved on to an assistant physio testing positive, and that's when the players got rattled. And you know the whole story
now. How is it being perceived, because it's very easy for this to become something that goes along nationalist lines, that people in England were pretty keen to be annoyed at the Indian team, it was their fault. Then power brokers in India are pretty keen to take offence at that sort of thing and turn it into a you against us against them kind of situation. And lost in the middle of it is the actual story about what actually happened.
True, but what all you said, especially us against them, etc., we still don't know. That's a perception. That's an outside perception, not an inside one. What really happened, and even I wouldn't know and you wouldn't know till we are one of the players, and the players really, we trust the players. But it is clear that the players put their foot down. It is clear that close to midnight on, was the test starting on Friday?
Friday, yeah.
Yes. So close to midnight on Thursday, the decision was made that you're packing your bags and you're leaving. And that was only because BCCI was left with no choice, because the players said, we can't play. And there were multiple reasons. The biggest one was obviously the mental thing, the fear that what if another person suffers and what happens then? What do you want to do? How are you going to treat the situation? And they got rattled. And once they got rattled, they came together. And they addressed, I just feel, this is I'm just basing it on what I have heard, is they came together and they confronted the BCCI and said, look, we can't play. And when your senior players, and which includes your leadership group, let's not take names, but you know who they are, say, I can't play, or I'm highly reluctant to play unless, and ECB is trying, like Tom Harrison was saying, that we tried every possible way to see, is there anything that we can put in place to mitigate the circumstance? There is nothing. What do you do with a closed dressing room at Old Trafford? How do you address that? There's nothing, nowhere else. Are you going to make the players sit outside in the stands? No, the stands are full. So what are you going to do? How do you address that? So these are kind of questions that came through the mind of the players, and then they said, look, this is what we can.
Yeah, Yeah, so when Jeff and I last talked about this on Friday, probably within an hour and a half of the cancellation of the Test match, the conclusion we arrived at was that the players and the BCCI made the rational evaluation that if any player tested positive, they'd be stuck in the UK. Public Health England guidelines would have them stuck here for 10 more days, and that would not only leave them isolated in the UK, but would mean they wouldn't get back in time for the Indian Premier League. So that gave fuel to the fire. It's all the IPL. It's the big beast that's the IPL that's ruining this final Test match. And if you want to dig around some of the forums online, which I do periodically around county cricket, that's the strong message, and a number of former players have sort of said the same. Would it be reasonable to say that this wasn't about the IPL, but to ignore that it was at least a small input or a driving factor, that if they got stuck here, they could miss some of the IPL? You can't completely divorce that either. That it's a little bit of the puzzle, but it's not the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, you can't entirely blame the IPL, but it is the IPL that kind of also was in the background. If the IPL was starting a week later, you would have the Test match played, correct? So it's simple as that. It's the tight window. You couldn't do anything about it. And the most important thing, I just feel that from the BCCI's point of view, money and all is obviously there, but because even ECB is thinking money right now to hold that and conduct that match, or extra T20s or whatever to cover up for the losses. But for the BCCI, I felt it's more from the UAE government's point of view. If you have someone positive coming into the country, you have tight restrictions there within the UAE, and then that they don't want that to have an impact on the T20 World Cup, because it's very, they've had various kinds of discussions around what this bubble would be for these two tournaments, and they don't want to have an impact. Franchises themselves started messaging me saying that, how did this happen? Because they were worried how some of these guys are going to enter the 5-6 franchises who had their players. They were going to enter their bubble. They've already worked hard to clear the one. Something happens if XYZ player goes into the franchise and tests positive tomorrow, that's news. Regardless of how you address the situation, it's news, and it is bad news. And BCCI doesn't want that bad news to happen on the eve of the World Cup. I feel those are the things. But I just want to know what the ECB felt. I don't know what you guys, I'm sure how the ECB thought, how did the ECB looked at it when they were talking to the players or the BCCI? Do you guys, have you had a word with any of them, the top bosses there?
Well, I think you can read a fair bit from Tom Harrison's comments. Really, he's been a fairly open book on this. They were blindsided by it, but the idea of guidelines being there to oversee what's safe living. I mean, you were spot on before in how you put it. How did we end up in a situation where it wasn't set out very clearly what safe living meant, which could have eliminated some of the risk? And we go back to the book launch, and we've talked a lot about the book launch already, and perhaps we won't back over it now. But Mal Con was tweeting during the week. Nagraj, I'm sure you saw what Mal had to say when he was working with Cricket Australia last year, before he came back and started working as a journalist again. And according to Mal, Ravi Shastri's attitude towards mask wearing and generally the COVID provisions when India were in Australia was fairly lax. That is, he thought that he could kind of run his own race. So it's not entirely out of step with his personality that he would take a fairly liberal interpretation to safe living, thus the book launch. And if that was the catalyst and the start of the chain reaction, I think that the ECB are right to think that deserves a bit of scrutiny. Whether Tom Harrison was there or not, by the way, it sort of doesn't really matter who else was there. It was the players inside of that environment and the members of the team inside that environment who have to wear responsibility, I think, for the decisions they made at that time. Yeah, it's true. But at the same time, I think Shastri, apparently in Australia, and I was not there, you were there, I'm guessing. So you guys are there. Yeah. You are closer to and what the rules were. And I think they were far more stricter compared to what Indian team experienced because they couldn't move around on certain places and they had to be restricted. And that's what they really felt. These are people who might not have a sense of entitlement, but they are they kind of feel that they need certain kind of freedom. And you can expect that an elite athlete does need that kind of time to break away and not think cricket. And they were traveling from the IPL. So yes, as a head coach, he had his responsibility to stand by his players and try and fight for whatever it is. Like, even if it comes across as
not inappropriate behavior in that sense, responding to the Brisbane government saying that you can't break these rules, and Indian BCCI saying that we're threatening that we'll pull out of the tour. Wasn't there a talk like that?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
yes.
at the very end, it was to do with a number
of
of threats were issued. Carefully placed stories were issued about the tour not proceeding, and they got there in the end. It was all fine, and of course we know how that story ends. But yeah, I wonder, just to back over something you said before about the players driving this decision, not so much the BCCI and the fact that they went to the organisation. That interests me. So player strength, but also the fact that from a BCCI perspective, administratively, they would have been quite happy for this test to go ahead. It was the players who were really pushing back and saying we rather not.
It's the fear. That's what I just said. I just go back to that. I think the players would have played the test. It's they wanted to win the series, right? Or whatever it is. They wanted to. They would have played, even if an understrength Indian side would have played it. And they had enough players to cover up, even if there were some of the top guys who were suffering from niggles, and one or two could have been rested for the final test, including Bumrah, I thought, would not play that test match. So it would have been an interesting test match to watch. England could have drawn the series. But it's the thing that is coming to me from this episode, and this could just become a sort of pattern, or I don't know whether they're having of a new kind of player power. I just feel that this is the first time I'm seeing players in Indian cricket coming together in a way after a long time to push and collectively say that we are tired. You need to understand our issues. If you remember when Kohli left in June, on June 1st or 2nd, I think it was the 2nd, when he gave the press conference before leaving for the World Test Championship final, he was asked the question about the mental workload, right? In addition to the physical, whatever workload you have, playing the World Test Championship final, followed by the England tour, followed by IPL, followed by a never-ending a conveyor belt of cricket. He said that at some point we are going to break and people have to take measures. And now they've taken it in their own hands that, look, we feel this is a situation we need to address, and boards need to address too, and boards need to consider that. And that's what Tom Harrison said, that we are playing too much cricket, even if he's just like putting a band-aid on something, a wound that they created in a way, partially. They have played a hand in creating this wound. I don't see how this will be resolved if in bigger series. I mean, like we have Ashes coming up, it'll be interesting to see 5-match series again, how they cope with that. If something similar happens.
Ultimately, what they've won, these players, is a few days respite. That's about it. It's not like they've won themselves a whole lot of time off that grind. They have to keep going back into it. It is interesting that there's no players' union in India. The Australian Cricketers Association is a big part of the political landscape of the sport in Australia. They're an influential body. There's no representative body, equivalent body for Indian players. Does something like this hint at the beginnings of some sort of collective bargaining power, or is it just that a few players at the moment have enough power that they have the clout to make the BCCI listen to them?
Yes, I think it's a temporary one. Till Kohli is there in this, I don't know when the next generation will think differently. Right now, Kohli has been talking about this for a while. He's been saying that that's why in the last year or two, you see certain players not playing marquee series. So, and I guess the pandemic has come to kind of help also. You have the best all-rounders in the world like Stokes sitting down, and I heard that's was it Kohli who got surprised totally that, wow, Ben Stokes talking mental health in that sense, right? Because you can see that this is the best athlete in the world cricket, and he's saying that I need time off. So there is something serious happening here, and I think, I don't know, this is a potential dangerous situation for all boards. David Warner pulls out of Ashes again. Let's see. I'm taking an example, or Steve Smith pulls out. That has a big impact on a marquee tournament. So administrators really need to figure out, I mean, how they're going to do this. Okay, they might say this is a temporary thing. We are going to live with the pandemic anyway, which is going to become hopefully endemic at some point, and then we'll carry on. Life will be as normal. But I think this is also a chance for world players to kind of get together. I've always been surprised that why captains can't get together and have a word with each other and bring that to the ICC.
Yeah, that's certainly how it's meant to be, isn't it? The captains are meant to sort of run the game, but it seldom feels like they do in practice. We thought it was going to be a test match on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Lawrence has a story on Monday saying it's going to be 2 T20 internationals instead. Did you see that story? That it's going to be an offer of two. So
I think I've read in now this morning and even BCCI saying something like that.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm asking is, how do you interpret that it goes from being, we'll replace your test match, and now it's like, philosophically, what does that mean? What are we really saying? That, what does this mean in terms, I suppose you can take that as you want, really, but it felt like a fairly big intervention to move it from a test match to a T20.
Well, I think that was part of the discussion. It's like it happened on that between those less than 24 hours between Wednesday evening, in fact 12 hours between Wednesday and Thursday mid-afternoon or something. These discussions were happening between ECB and BCCI that how do we do this? BCCI had made up its mind. It had made up its mind as soon as it got the feeling from the players that they're not going to play, right? So then they started moving to the next step, and that's where they got stuck at. And these discussions were happening between those two boards saying that, well, how do we do this now? I'm losing this money. So the first step is, it's very easy. Just add 2 T20s. It's very easy. It's just you have to, and T20 cricket will get you a lot of more money and the broadcasters will be happy, etc. But it is more, for me, the question is about the fans, right? They wanted, they paid, they looked at this test match months in advance or maybe a year in advance, and they booked their tickets, they've made their summer schedule accordingly, and they're the ones who are suffering. Both boards have said we are sorry about it and all that. But the fans are like, the fans are the stakeholders, and no one has asked them whether they would want a test match or whether they would want a T20, right? But you can see there is an appeal for T20, for test cricket, sorry. There is an appeal for test cricket and compelling test cricket, even if it's a one-off test. Personally, I just feel that why can't they just play as part of the series next part of this series, even if there would be a certain few players who will not be part of it, because it's such an extraordinary situation. Why don't you play that and you have the same level of points, and then you play it at the same venue? If you can create that sort of, obviously you'll have to play at Old Trafford, otherwise Lancashire will be very offended in case they play somewhere else. That's the bigger question to me, that has anyone thought about the fans? Are you just making those decisions purely on a monetary basis?
But it's a weird kind of concept to get your head around, that it doesn't feel like it would work to be part of the same series if it's a year later. It's not the same series. It's like the grandfather's axe, with 3 new axe heads and 4 new axe handles. It's not the same thing a year later because it's a different time. The players are at different stages in their careers. It is something else.
True, but it's a one-off, right? It's not going to happen. This is not a common occurrence. I'm just saying that because after such a nice series, it might just somehow, even if it feels really, it is a situation that has, I don't know. You played as a one-off test, no one's going to help, but play it as a test.
I support it for
What would be the vote on this between 3 of us? Would you want T20 or test?
Well, I think I support it on a couple of grounds, the idea as it's been portrayed. One is that it's unusual, so we can kind of get around the idea of an unusual thing happening in cricket. We tend to like that in cricket, unusual occurrences. 2 is that, as you say, Nagraj, the fans have paid for test match tickets. We know that there's a way of transferring those to the next year. That's what happened at the Oval 2 weeks ago. All those tickets were reissued from last year to this year. So logistically, all of the workers who missed out on the chance to come and spend 5 days earning money, it isn't just about the 22 players. There is an industry around it. There's a carnival around it, and you can do that next year. And I think last but not least, and Will McPherson made this point on Twitter, how pissed off would everyone be if Ben Stokes, Jofra Archer, and whoever else who's not playing at the moment comes back and beats India in the 5th Test match. They square the series 2-2. The anger would fuel the world. We wouldn't need to worry about carbon emissions for a couple of years, because you could fuel the planet on the basis of the anger from Indian fans, which would be amusing if nothing else. So I think that.
But that's what I'm saying. That this is a chance opportunity for the players. Ask them, what do they want? Do they want to play a one-off test? Do they want to play this as a continuation? Ask the players. Ask Kohli whether he would be willing to do that. I really would want to know his answer.
But also there's the World Test Championship, right? So the World Test Championship points remain unresolved. Correct. So even if it is a one-off test for the... you could interpret it as a one-off test match, not count to the series. I'm being facetious about Indian fans being furious, by the way, before you go and go after me in the YouTube comments. But the point here is that there would be a way of it still counting for World Test Championship points based on the percentage system they implemented before the second cycle, where it is played as a one-off, a la Delhi in 1996, Nagraj.
I don't want to go that far, but I just feel that the thing for me is, what does Kohli want? He wanted to win here, okay? He really was so... On Wednesday, apparently, were you there at the ground? On Wednesday at training at Old Trafford, apparently he was bubbling. He was like full of enthusiasm that I'm actually there. Like this, now they have to believe that this Indian team, now we have won. This is one place where we did not win for a long time, and now we're winning here too. Now you got to respect us. And, Kohli wants that sort of, many commentators have said that this has been a legacy tour for him. And yes, it is. He wanted to leave a mark. And he has, despite not doing much with the bat, he has not been very fluent with the bat. He has managed to create a unit that was leading 2-1 going into the final test, which is a unique thing. So, yeah, I don't know what I want Kohli to answer that question. And coming back to the confusion, quickly, I want to wrap this is that you can see what happened with BCCI yesterday. The top two bosses, Ganguly says one thing first, saying that this should be a one-off test, surely. Sometime later, he corrects himself in another interview, apparently, and says that this is going to be a continuation of the series. Then you have the BCCI secretary saying that, yes, we have offered to the to ECB 2 T20s, and they cannot impose themselves with one test. So you can see the sense of confusion between the two boards. And ECB has said that they've written to ICC, which claim that they have not, nothing has come to us. So even the boards don't know. Forget us trying to resolve. Even the boards don't know what they want. I just get this. I can't understand. That's why I feel that the players, this is an opportunity. Talk, go ahead and talk, take this forward. Whether they will do that, I don't know. They might be doing it quietly. Maybe Kohli has said it already, that I don't want to play this as a one-off test. Maybe he has said it, I want to play it as one-off test. Because of the points, because of that's crucial.
What is your understanding of what the interests of each board would be? Because aside from replacing the match and the money, the broadcast money that they need to put matches on in order to get the money from Sky and all the rest of it, there's also the matter of the insurance for the costs to the ECB from having the cancellation, where if it's a forfeited match, then they can claim their insurance money. If it's a cancelled match due to COVID, they can't claim their insurance money. So the ECB is trying to run the line that because nobody actually had COVID, it's not a COVID cancellation, but it's all about, so the Indian board doesn't want to accept that because they don't want to forfeit. They want to say that the test match wasn't played. How do you see this playing out in terms of who wants what and what the potential variables would be?
I don't think they will take it to that point where both boards are clashing with each other and that will leave bad blood between these are two key players at the ICC board and they want to be unified regardless of their differences. So I don't see this going to the disputes resolutions because then the lawyers will interpret it either way and either it depends how, and the ICC wouldn't want that to happen. So they would mutually agree to something. BCCI will never agree that they have forfeited. That's impossible. That will kind of, the World Test Championship will just fall flat there and then. That if India pulls out, India will say, I'll pull out of this now. Whether they, I'm just being I'm exaggerating the situation, but I just feel that clearly, I don't know about the insurance. I don't want to kind of act as an expert. I really do not know the ECB rules. I've been told that there is no insurance, if I remember correctly. It's only from the fans' perspective. There is an insurance to refund the money, etc., but not as far as the cancellation goes of the test match. So I can't add much, sorry, on that front.
Okay.
On the players again, just to kind of do a bit of sitting of the record here, there was some furore on Saturday when some players flew out on private jets back to India. So within 24 hours of the test being cancelled, they were on their flights saying, aha, it's proof all along they didn't want to be here. They were rushing back to the Indian Premier League. They were going to Dubai. They have to quarantine. This is all some giant conspiracy. Can you just unpick that for us? Because I think that's important to set the record straight there. That, I mean, yes, it might have looked bad. I accept that it may have looked bad if you wanted to look through that lens. But really, there was a practical element to this. And what point was there, them sitting around in a hotel room till Wednesday anyway?
I mean, you could see a sense that by the time the BCCI sent out the release, some might have even boarded the flight, like the Mumbai Indians players. They were already there, right? Like Rohit, Bumrah, Surya were already like on board. They had taken the flight. They were the first set of players to land in Abu Dhabi or UAE, and then Kohli and Siraj went. These were the only 2 charter flights. The rest of the players were flying commercial flights, if my sources are correct. So it is bad. It looks bad as an image. It looks that hours after when you were supposed to be in the field, you're actually flying to the UAE with the IPL in mind. So does that mean that you really didn't want to play at all and you were just focused on IPL? But no, that was not I personally feel that was not their motive. Their thing was like, let's move on. Let's go there, isolate ourselves, make sure that this doesn't kind of breach the IPL bubble now. If one of us falls positive while we are isolating, it will at least not have an impact on the IPL. And that was the reason that they had to move fast, because once they've decided that the series is not going forward, they did think about postponing it, right, by a day or 2, and that didn't work out too. So if once that you are known that, you have to take that next step, which is to kind of, okay, let's leave the country, let's move on. They didn't feel England is unsafe. I don't think that was the case, right? It is not that England is unsafe. They were moving around the streets, they were having their takeaways, they were sitting around, and I'm sure we've not touched upon the book launch where there were people from outside. I'm guessing I was not there, but hopefully the players were not they were on the one side and the guests were on the other side. So I don't think from Indian players' perspective, England as such as a place was unsafe. It's just that's what it is in this world, that you have to move. Your tournament starts in 9 days' time. At that point, they were looking at it, and I need to isolate for 5 days or 6 days actually in the UAE. And let me do that. Let me just kind of cover up that time instead of, Yeah.
Well, it's a story that is going to keep rolling in one way or another, maybe all the way up until the Manchester Test of next year when we do it all again. Maybe it'll get cancelled a second time. That'd be funny. Nagraj Gollapudi, thank you so much for joining The Final Word.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Nagraj Gollapudi, thank you so much for joining The Final Word. I think we've come to the end of another show.
We have, and as we leave, I've mentioned the vaccine game off the top. I'll mention it at the end as well. We had Mark Henderson from Dulwich on the show a couple of months ago talking about the amazing Griffin Sports Complex for women and girls there at Dulwich. It's a ground which is going to be exclusively used for the women's and girls divisions as of next year. They've got to raise $5,000 though to get a square in operation for season 2022. And as part of that, his daughter Anna, who we've talked about an awful lot on the show over the years, and she's been on Sky Cricket. Her leg spin has been featured. They are trying to raise money via all the 176 runs she made this year in the under-10s at Dulwich. So I'll put something in the show notes there. But if you want to make a contribution to helping Dulwich get their girls and women off to the new ground next year, you can do that. And we can't wait to be there ourselves at Dulwich with the Final Word 11 on Friday for the vaccine game against the Oval Dream Boys.
Absolutely. You had better get some sort of streaming in operation, because there's no formal matches on Friday that I'm aware of. I don't have to work on Friday night, so I expect to be watching that game one way or another from Melbourne. We have been doing this across countries, and who knows how long we'll have to continue doing that. It's been a long year with a lot of work going into the Final Word. So a special thanks to everyone who's on the Patreon and more people signing up. It's been bloody amazing. It has continued to be a source of joy and wonder and a revelation in our lives that people want to help us keep making this show, story time on the weekends, the dailies when they come around, and then the other sort of on the horizon projects that we keep thinking of, things that we might be able to do into the future. So thank you one and all. Thanks to Brick Lane for sponsoring the show with their delicious alcoholic and sometimes non-alcoholic beverages. check them out, bricklanebrewing.com. Thanks to Wisden Cricket Monthly. Get yourself a discount subscription if you don't have one already. Why wouldn't you? And thanks to David Collins for editing the show. It's on the Bad Producer Podcast Network. Check out their other programs if you want some more listening. And thanks to Adam for being here with me every week, except occasionally when he's Daniel Norcross recently.
Works for me, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Just to reiterate what you said there, everyone that's jumped on Patreon or found us through YouTube as well, that's, again, a source of joy to both of us that YouTube channel is up to about 2.5 million people who've watched it now in whatever it's been. We've only really had 2 proper goes. 9 months, but really about 4 months when you consider when we've been putting some real effort into it. So that's pretty cool. And we'll be back with all the daily shows soon. And in the short term, story time. I'm back for story time this week. Back in for Daniel Norcross. We've got some stories that we would like to tell you.
Mm-hmm. We do. We had to go about it, write them out, and find it ourselves. See you later.
Bye.